Good evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Hilaal Live. My name is Faraz Badal. I would like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us. I'd like to thank my colleague Luqman Shadrack for taking you through that first part of the show. Now, a proposed U.S. bill will require the U.S. administration to examine whether South Africa is undermining U.S. security and foreign policy interests. Republican John James and Democrat Jared Moskowitz say South Africa is siding with what they call malign actors on the international stage. The bill threatens South Africa's prospects of benefiting from the African Growth and Opportunity Act. Joining me now to discuss this, I'd like to welcome Professor Jacque, who is an Associate Professor of International Relations with research interests in decolonial IR at Wits University. Prof, good day. Thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live.
Thank you very much for having me. It's nice to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Right, Prof. Is the sour grapes from the United States?
I think it's a very interesting threat, because if you look at the ethos, the proclaimed ethos of AGOA, it's basically something that is based on goodwill to help grow Africa's economy. And then, to go against this and threaten to take it away, it really sends very duplicitous messages. And so for me, as a scholar that looks at, neocolonialism, decolonialism, I mean, this really looks like, it's been used as an instrument to discipline South Africa for not going along with the United States' stance on the war in Gaza.
Prof, interesting that, of course, both the Republican and the Democrat representative are saying that South Africa is undermining U.S. security and foreign policy interest. Do they really believe that a country on the southern tip of the continent really poses that much of a threat in undermining the mighty United States of America? I mean, are they justified in what they're saying with regards to the statement?
I also think that, we need to talk about, well, what is their, security interests, and why would they assume that their security interests and foreign policy goals and objectives are that of South Africa's? South Africa does not see the Palestinians as a threat to world security, and definitely not a threat to our security. Hence the idea, and I mean, to really acknowledge that, and to speak out against genocide, which is the bottom line. And so trying to flip the dialogue and to move it away from an issue of genocide to an issue of security is also, it's trying to obstruct the optics here, and trying to really, in my opinion, change the focus of what we should focus on, and that is that South Africa is not going to be party or support genocide. And that, I see that, the latest is that South Africa is interested in taking further action against Israel if it doesn't see, progress being made when, in meeting what the ICJ set
the ruling, yes,
the Israelis to do.
Prof, the relationship obviously between South Africa and United States is a fragile one given AGOA. I mean, I was at State of the Nation last week. I spoke to Minister Ibrahim Patel, Minister of Trade and Industry. I asked him, look, is there any chance that AGOA comes under threat given what is currently happening? He was very, he's very confident that, look, it's going to remain the same. But let's talk about the importance of AGOA, because one would stress that within the top 5 trading partners of South Africa, the United States ranks right up there. Is it in South Africa's best interest to keep that still going? And what would it take for it to really become very, very sour?
I think that it's up to the Department of Trade and Industry to, they have a team of, well-equipped, smart negotiators, and I think that they're more than able and equipped to decide whether this is, a good or a bad, um, sort of an act to be a part of. And so, I mean, there's been a lot of, there are a lot of problems with AGOA, especially when it comes to, the health and sanitation of agricultural products that get, exported to South Africa. And South Africa has had very, very limited abilities to, keep the kind of standards that it keeps locally, on these issues on what the United States brings in. And there have been a fair amount of accusations of, even though you're bringing in, cheap and free food, you're basically determining what, what South Africa gets in this, in this term, in terms of this agreement. And, whether and waiving all these compliances that we would do with other trading partners as well. And, a large, amount of concern that this, that the AGOA agreement, leads to a fair amount of dumping of products that the United States can't dispose of in their own, in their own market, on the South African market. And, so South Africa really needs to, reflect on this and, reflect seriously in, to what extent does this give us preferential access to the United States market? Does it really give us, advantages in the United States' agricultural areas, in the agricultural economics, where the United States heavily subsidizes their agricultural for political means, as a way to, have districts vote for a particular party. And, and so, in areas where South Africa should have a, a competitive advantage over the United States goods, to what extent, is that even out if the United States still, puts tariffs or, helps their own industries in this regard.
Prof, I want to look back to last year, even way before, of course, the current war in Gaza is happening right now, the Russia-Ukraine situation, where you have the ambassador to South Africa from the United States, Ruben Brigadier, saying he'll bet on whatever he wants to bet that South Africa had loaded arms onto the infamous Lady R. Of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa announces a panel to review it. It comes back that South Africa did not do it. Ruben Brigadier, to a certain extent, is forced to have a bit of egg on his face. And then we have what is happening currently in Gaza, where Joe Biden is refusing to really take harsh disciplinary action against Israel, given that they are the #1 arms supplier to Israel. Is the US in a bit of a corner? Is that something where South Africa can say, we can use that to leverage any possibility of a cutting of ties that you, the United States, want to impose on us?
I think that it's really in South Africa's interests to, keep the, the focus on the fact that the United States is militarily supporting, a country that is committing genocide against, another population. And that, the United States has, all kinds of, interests in conflict, because their arms industry is just so big. And the arms industry in the United States has enormous political power, has enormous political lobby groups. And we could see that interest playing out in the United States' involvement under the Bush administration in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so the United States doesn't have a lot of moral high ground when it comes to getting involved in the Middle East. And so, their foreign policy interests and their, geopolitical hegemonic interests in the Middle East have been, very, very thinly, veiled under the idea that we're going to save, the poor populations of Afghanistan and Iraq from their oppressors and an oppressive religious regime, and showing that they have very, very little understanding of the internal dynamics.
Prof, can we? Are you there? Professor, are you there?
Okay. Sovereignty in its foreign policy, and the ability to make independent foreign policy.
Prof, one final question. Obviously, you mentioned that South Africa wants to take further steps, of course, with the ICJ, given right now that Israel is intent, and it looks more likely for it to happen for a ground offensive on Rafah, where it is the only last place of safety and security for the people or the residents of Gaza. Looking at it, I mean, are there serious good grounds for South Africa to really to go to the ICJ and say, look, you've of course made this ruling that Israel needs to stop its hostilities against the people of Gaza, stop its violence against the people of Gaza. They're not doing it because bombings continue to happen in whatever's left of the main parts of Gaza, and now they're moving on to Rafah with a ground offensive. Is there plausible evidence for South Africa now to go back to the ICJ and say, here it is, what is the next step?
I think that is a real possibility and should be looked at. I mean, the problem with its, genocide is if you wait too long, if you see what is happening in Rafah, there's not going to be much left if something isn't done imminently. And I think that what is, missing is that there has been, offers, of negotiating a peace and a ceasefire, from countries in the global south, and yet, we still assume that we have to wait for the United States to intervene and to negotiate a peace settlement. And Anthony Blinken has been in the Middle East region, and really very little has come of that. And so I think that if we wait for the United States to get, get to have everybody around the table in ways that is acceptable for Israel, we are going to see there will be very little of Palestine left to save. And so I think South Africa really, in this case, has the moral high ground, especially as the United States has always set itself up as the moral voice of the international system, the global policeman. Well, what do you do when your global policeman goes, is not as impartial as, it claims to be. And then other countries, even if they're not, huge, superpowers like the United States, have every right to come to the fore and speak up, especially because South Africa has experienced, apartheid and has experienced other countries coming to its support.
Prof, thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
That's Professor Jacque, who is an Associate Professor of International Relations with research interests in decolonial IR at the University of Witwatersrand. After the break, I'll have the latest in news, finance, and sports. Do stay tuned.